and welcome everyone. My name is Stephanie Adams and I will be the host for this TLC session titled, Why Am I Taking This? Importance of General Education in Student Lives. This session will be presented by Elena Pascarella and Debby Hailwood. We are excited that you have joined us for their presentation. The chat window will be open during this session, so please feel free to get involved and participate. Please welcome Elena Pascarella.
Hello, all. I'm Elena Pascarella. Just a little bit about me. I am the assessment analyst for the Division of Gen Ed, but more than that, I'm also an associate faculty member in the Division of General Education. So I teach some of our entry point courses. So I have kind of firsthand knowledge of how some of this stuff works very early on in a student's program. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick, Debbie?
Sure, let me make sure I'm off mute. Hi everyone, my name is Debby Hailwood and I am a lead faculty member for EXP 105. So for those of you who are undergraduate students and who've been at Ashford since your beginning of your time here, you probably took EXP 105 at some point in time. I'm the lead faculty for that course, and I work with a great group of other full-time faculty members, and we do our best to make that course and that experience one where we're welcoming you into the Ashford classroom or the Ashford environment. We're also helping you transition into a new institution and perhaps an online institution if it was your first time online.
Thank you, Debbie. So kind of what we want to explore today is the new general education requirements and how that kind of works in terms of our student lives and your lives as students. How many times, I know I experienced it as an undergrad where I'm sitting in a course that I'm required to take, where I'm required to take a math course, and I'm thinking, I'm an English major. Why do I have to take math? It doesn't make any sense because it doesn't seem to really connect to the program. But what we're really
Hey Elena, I think you're freezing up. Now I don't see you at all. I'm wondering if she should get
about today are the skills that general education really help you to build.
I'm going off mute. Did we lose everybody?
No, I think it's just Elena.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna go down to her room real quick.
Oh, I can hear her now.
Oh, can you see me and hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, it was just cutting out for a little bit there.
Okay. So what we really want to, like what I was saying, what we really want to explore is the foundational skills that general education really teach us in order to help you be better students, be better people, and be better professionals. And so we really decided on this idea of a tree and looking at the competencies of the general education as those building blocks. And the first thing we really want to look at, any tree has to have a strong root system in order to really flourish. And so what we call our core competencies are our roots. And the first area that we really want to look at are our core competencies of critical thinking and ethical reasoning. And as we were looking at the competencies, we really saw that they kind of fit into various categories. So, and we tried to kind of pair them and group them together. And what critical thinking really does is it helps you pretty much what it says. know how to think and express your ideas and have that understanding that education is more than just learning facts. It's really about training your mind to be able to think and to be able to analyze all of the data and information that comes at us daily and really comprehend that and use that and apply that. And that's kind of where ethical reasoning can also come into play in this idea of thinking. It's really about understanding how the things we think about and our values and our systems of values really help us to define who we are as people and how we interact with the world. And so this idea of being able to think critically and being able to reason ethically and use ethics in that way really kind of help us to determine that really strong foundation. Because if we can't think and we can't reason, whether it's using ethics or it's using some other form of thinking or value system, then all of the rest of this kind of falls apart. It all kind of starts in your brain and your ability to really think through things. So that's really kind of the first foundation of these core competencies.
Awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about communicate. So we have two core competencies that fall under the communicate, or Elena used the word expression, and it's a really good word as well. So the first one is written communication. And written communication, sometimes I think we think about grammar and spelling, which are definitely important skills, but written communication isn't just about those surface level skills. It also means being able to integrate information to effectively communicate a central message and create kind of a cohesion of effective written work for a specific purpose, right? And then of course, all of this, it also incorporates being able to practice academic integrity when writing. And written communication could be something that you put out there and maybe later will be read. So like if you're writing an article for a blog or a newspaper or a book, it might not necessarily be immediately read or consumed. But anyway, written communication also doesn't necessarily just mean the actual act of writing. It's also important to be able to interpret information from different sources to be able to put into your written communication, into your writing. Then the other one is oral and interpersonal communication. We can actually kind of parse these two out, because oral communication could be something like, we think of old school like speech classes. You get in front of the class and you give a speech, and maybe you need to be persuasive or something. And that could be oral communication. It could be doing something exactly what we're doing here, is giving a presentation and other people are consuming it. Maybe we're having a little bit of a dialogue, but interpersonal communication is also part of that dialogue. Interpersonal communication could take place orally, like we're doing right now. It could take place written, like you do in your online classroom, where you have to communicate, have interpersonal communication through the written word, which we all know can be very difficult because we no longer have things like facial expressions or gestures or tone. So we have to be very careful about that. And our you know, like our online world, not just in our classroom, but also, you know, just the fact that we're doing so much online nowadays. As a matter of fact, I'm in San Diego right now and Elena's in Iowa, and we've had to communicate interpersonally through the various means that we have. That is such an important skill for us to be able to practice and to be able to collaborate with as well.
So the next kind of piece of this puzzle for these core competencies is the support piece. So we figured out how to think, and we figured out how to communicate how we think, and we have all of those thoughts. Now what we need to do in order to be effective communicators and effective thinkers is be able to kind of, what Debbie was talking about, pull in all of that other information and integrate that and support our ideas and support our writing. And this is where information literacy and quantitative reasoning comes into play. And I really just kind of love this quote from Neil deGrasse Tyson, who I'm just kind of in love with. Because he makes science interesting. And he's saying all information is good, even when it's bad. So even being able to parse out all of, you know, that bad information that we may find online, we may find in newspapers to use, you know, common nomenclature right now, fake news, being able to parse through that and figure out what is true, what is factual, and how do we determine that? How do we determine what's a good source in order to support our ideas? And what's good data? When we're talking about quantitative reasoning, we're talking a little bit about more than just math and being able to do math. We're talking about being able to read an article with any number of numbers, basically, any amount of quantitative data, and say, you know, I don't know that this is accurate. Because the thing about statistics is that you can make statistics say kind of whatever you want them to say. And so being able to figure out which statistics are accurate and which statistics are not, and looking at kind of those research methods and really building those skills, this is where you kind of set that foundation for building those skills in order to be able to parse out what's real, what's factual, what's true. And that's really kind of the important thing as you're talking about the foundations, the root system of the general education. Like, these are the foundational skills that will kind of carry you not only throughout the rest of the gen ed, but throughout the rest of your program. If you're unable to do these things, you're not going to be as successful in your program, because programs really require you to be able to do all of these things. And so you're building the skills that maybe at the time don't seem like they're important, but a year or so down the line, when you're taking, you know, if you're an accounting major and you're taking a class on finance, well, you may need to be able to figure out, looking at a business's portfolio, what's the true ratios, what is actually accurate, especially if you're in the business world making those kind of decisions. And so having these skills to be able to parse that out is really kind of important.
Great. I'm seeing some good comments on the side as well in the chat about Gen 499. You're right, Gen 499 is undergraduate course. So 3 more of our general education competencies. The first one is scientific reasoning. When Elena and I were talking about this presentation, she made a really good point, and she said she thinks about scientific reasoning as how we interact in the physical world. You know, I'm not a scientist. It was not my major, but being able to reason scientifically also allows us to think of, in terms of deductive reasoning, it allows us to think in terms of the scientific process. We take hypotheses, we test them. That's all part of the scientific reasoning. And so obviously, we don't want to think of it as just pure science. It's what are those skills that we're developing when we're going through this process, when we're taking these courses and when we're having these conversations in these classes. The next one is digital literacy. Digital literacy is such an important component of just our world right now, because we consume so much information online, and we consume so much using the digital world and the digital realm. Some people feel as though they exist more accurately in the digital world than in real life, IRL, right? So being able to navigate the digital world, understanding also how that's impacting us in our social world is really, really important too. And then finally, the foundations and skills for lifelong learning. This aligns back to the course that I'm lead faculty for, EXP 105. This ability to really become this lifelong learner. We talk a lot about metacognition and who you are as a learner, becoming your own best learning coach. And that's an important aspect too, if we are going to be stepping outside of a college classroom and trying to also continue to be a critical learner.
So the last kind of area is really, we talked about how we engage with the world around us. And these are those skills that really help us kind of define what it means to be human and what it means to exist in the world. Something like aesthetic awareness and reasoning, it seems like if you're taking a art course, an art appreciation course, you're taking a film course or a literature course. If you're in business, it may not seem like that's something that's a set of skills, being able to analyze that's really going to come into play. But when we think about how we just interact with our friends and family, how often do we sit down and talk about a TV show that we've just seen, or a movie that we've watched, or a book we've read? We have these conversations, and having an understanding of how we develop meaning from these kind of artistic texts can really help us not only define kind of who we are, but what it means to exist in this world. And this is where intercultural and global awareness also comes into play, because we're just looking at how we exist in the world through a different lens. Aesthetic awareness and reasoning looks at it through an artistic lens. When we're talking about intercultural and global awareness, we're looking at it through the lens of our own identities, who we identify maybe culturally, or gender identity, or sexual orientation identity. All of these different identities kind of intersect to form who we are as individuals. No one is just one thing. We're all a variety of things all the time, and we have a variety of roles. And understanding how our role fits in the bigger global picture, and how we interact with different cultures and different experiences, really kind of helps build that society that we kind of need, where we can talk to each other and have discussions mutually respectful, and have differences of opinions, and really kind of figure out what that means in the bigger global context when we don't agree, and how we can kind of navigate that in a way that's mutually beneficial for all. And that's kind of where civic responsibility also can come into play, because that's how we engage in society on a government level, kind of how we interact with politics and policies, and what it means to be civically engaged, and what it means to have a responsibility for your community, and how you engage with your community at the most base level. How do you interact with those around you? And kind of the hope is that through these areas that you kind of figure out what it means to be a better person, and what it means to make things better for everyone involved, or as equitable as possible. And this is where we come into that idea of equity, and really how we can make the world just a better place, because it's not always great all the time for everyone. And having that understanding through all of these different lenses, we can kind of figure out, what does it mean for me to be an individual, and for me to be a human, and how do I interact and engage with the social structures around me. So this is where we really kind of want to open it up to everyone, and really have a conversation about these applications and things. So Debbie, do you want to kind of introduce this area?
Sure. And, there was a great question in the chat, so I just want to pull it out here. Zachary asked, where do we find out where the gen ed courses are? And, I mentioned if you transferred in courses from a different institution, it's going to depend. For what classes you take here at Ashford is going to depend on what you had transferred in. But I linked in the chat window a great website to go to. It's actually part of our Ashford University catalog. We talks about the general education curriculum, our philosophy and purpose of the curriculum, and then all the different requirements, the general education requirements as a whole. This isn't necessarily always going to be specific to you if you transferred in courses that meet some of these competencies. But then it also breaks it down by different competencies and what courses align to that. So if you wanted to learn a little bit more about these, that's a really great place to start. But I also want to switch gears to our presentation here. Thinking about these core competencies and some of the overview we've just given you, we want you to think a little bit about how will going through these core competencies and the regular competencies in general, how will these skills help translate to make you a better student overall? So again, like Elena mentioned before, she was sitting in her math class thinking, how is this going to help me as an English major? I'm in math. I don't really care about math. But thinking about the transferability of those skills as an academic student into her English program, or thinking about some of these skills that you might have sat in your class thinking, why do I need to take this? I am an accounting major. I'm going to be an elementary school teacher or something like that. How will that, in your opinion, go ahead and feel free to share in the chat. I also noticed that there are some full-time faculty in the room as well. So if they want to pipe in and contribute to this conversation, you know, they're the ones on the front lines as well. So please, please do. So I'm going to give just a few seconds. For people to think. So Zachary talks about using the general education course at Ashford to be informational. Glad you'd like to take them. Brandon says giving you basic knowledge to help you understand. I'm thinking about, like, yesterday was election day in several of the states across this country. And so one of our competencies is civic responsibility. And so, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean you take this class, you're going to go out and vote, but being aware and of being able to understand of what's going on in our world, and even what's going on in our local environment, our local community. I think that's a really important aspect of just being part of this, being a citizen and part of this country. But having having that skill of civic responsibility hopefully will also encourage you to go out and talk to your community members, learn more about what's affecting other people around you, maybe how you can have that dialogue of how we can make some change where you are, where you live. There's some people who go out there and they decide they want to run for something. They want to be on the front lines of that change. And I think that's an important part of it as well. That's a great understanding too. So in terms of academic application, maybe that's something that you talk about, you bring into your classroom. So if you want to be, let's say, an elementary school teacher and you've developed the skill of civic responsibility, you might start thinking about how might I bring that into my middle school class, or I guess we talked about elementary. How might I bring that into my 4th grade classroom? How might I start having conversations about that? How might I even bring this into conversations with parents that I'm working with? We talk about digital literacy. That's a really important one, right? When we're working with, when we're thinking about our academic skills as well. How can I incorporate my understanding of digital literacy into my assignments? You know, maybe I'm thinking about the PowerPoint presentation I'm creating, or maybe I'm thinking about the social media assignment that I have, and how can I bring in some of the tools that I've learned.
And I think to Debbie's point too, talking about those tools, something like aesthetic awareness and reasoning could come into play with that as well. I mean, when you think about creating a PowerPoint for a presentation as a business person, you want something that's visually appealing. And so being able to understand from an art appreciation standpoint, how colors work together and how shapes and spacing works, you can then take that skill that you just learned in art appreciation as you're applying it to looking at works of art, to doing a PowerPoint and making sure everything kind of balances. As Debbie and I were creating this presentation, we had at one point had a lot of white space on these slides when we're talking about the application. And so just a basic understanding of how kind of aesthetics works and how spacing and blank space kind of works, we were able to figure out, okay, in order to make this more visually appealing, we need to find something to fill this space, and how are we going to do that? And so there are all of these other underlying skills that we learn in some of these general education courses that come into play that we may not even necessarily think that it actually we're using that skill set. But so something as simple as creating a visually appealing PowerPoint uses aesthetic reasoning and awareness. Our next one, and that kind of transitions into our next application, really looking at how will this make me a better employee? Like, what are the skills that I can take from these core competencies that will, or irregular competencies that will make me more employable? We talk a lot about in higher ed, the idea of gainful employment. How will the skills and things that we're making students learn help them get a job and be a valuable member of their profession afterwards? And a lot of times we think about that in terms of the programmatic learning, but a lot of what we're doing here in these competencies are really setting that foundation. So what are some thoughts about how some of these competencies might make you a better employee? I see Zachary says that, you know, information and digital literacy is very important in all professions. I would definitely agree. It's important to really understand information that we're taking in and how we can then apply it to other things. We're always taking in knowledge and information at a rapid pace. So being able to get through that, sort through that, and figure out what's relevant and what's not relevant is really kind of important. Do you have any other thoughts on that? I agree, Amanda. It does make you just a more well-rounded person. And it does maybe sound a little simple, which kind of brings us into our last area. How will this make us just better people in general? So really personalizing that experience. How will this make us a better person? And I think Amanda was getting to that, being well-rounded.
And Nancy says, I can present information to my students. It's informative and interesting, entertaining. And I'm just going to ask, I'm going to assume you are a teacher or an aspiring teacher, because you say your students. And absolutely, you know, this, I think Elena and I, our goal is, if you walk away from this presentation, the 3 things that we want you to think about is when you're taking a course, a general education course, and thinking to yourself, gosh, you know, why am I taking this? Why do I have to do this? The 3 questions we want you to ask yourself is, how will this make me a better student? How will this make me a better employee? And how will this make me a better person? What are the skills that you can take away from that? And how can you turn around again and translate some of those skills to yourself as a student, employee, or just in your day-to-day, everyday life?
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize too that because we are talking about those skills and asking those questions about those skills, that the content of the course is really just the lens through which we're building those skills. So while the content is important, there are a lot of skills and what we call sometimes in the business and professional world soft skills that you're building using this content as the means to build those skills. And so sometimes the content is really secondary in general education to being able to really build those skills.
Thank you for that comment, Zachary. All core competencies and general competencies presented are skills you need in all professions. Absolutely. They're not specific to one area. You're going to be thinking critically all the time. You're going to be asked to write and to interact, right, with other individuals. You're going to be asked to do all of these things in some way or another. And so it's so important. That's why we have these particular competencies.